Hello everyone. In the last video, we went over the graphical side of calculating limits. We covered all the possible questions that can come in your exam related to this topic. Now for the calculation part. Whenever you see a question like this, which we read as limit as x approaches 1 of this equation, then you should know that we are talking about calculation of limits. In such questions, if you substitute this value in the given equation, you will see that you will get one of the three answers. Either you will simply get a numerical value like 6, or you will get a numerical value divided by 0, or you will get a 0 divided by 0. For the first scenario, where 0 is in the denominator, we simply say that the limit does not exist. For the second scenario, if we get a numerical value 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 or any other value, we say that the limit does exist and the value of that limit is 6. And in the third scenario, we will get a 0 out of 0. For that, we will need some manipulation that we will see in the next couple of videos. For this video specifically, we'll cover the scenario where the limit exists. Before I jump into that the limit exists, I want to solve one question of each type. In calculating limits, either you will get a one equation question on your right or a two equation question on your left. Let's cover the one equation one first. As soon as you see a question written like this, find limit as x approaches 2 of any value, the first step you have to do is to substitute the value this x is equal to 2 into the equation. Let's try doing it with the equations we have below. Find limit as x approaches -1 of this equation. According to the rule we have established, we'll simply substitute -1 into the equation. So 6 -1 square plus 5 into -1 plus 1. 6 -5 plus 1, and the answer is 2. This is the first scenario where we will say that the limit is 2 as the answer is a numerical value. For the second question, find limit as x approaches 2 of this equation. So according to the rule, we will just substitute 2 into the equation. So 2 plus 2 divided by 2 minus 2 is equal to 4 over 0. This is the second type where 0 is in the denominator, so we simply say that the limit does not exist. For the third question, find limit as x approaches 2 of this equation. We'll simply substitute it. 2 square minus 4 over 2 minus 2. 4 minus 4 over 2 minus 2, 0 over 0. This is the third type where in order to find an answer, we have to go to step 2, which is manipulation of the equation. We will go over all the manipulation techniques, but for this one, the manipulation technique is a square minus b square is equal to a plus b, a minus b. For the equation here, we can also write 4 as 2 square. So the equation would be x square minus 2 square divided by x minus 2. Now the numerator has reached this form, which can be written as this. So x plus 2 x minus 2 divided by x minus 2. We can simply cancel off x minus 2 and x minus 2 and we'll be left with x plus 2. If we substitute the value 2 into the equation, we will get 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Hence, 4 is your answer. So we have learned that whenever the answer comes out to be 0 out of 0 due to substitution, which is step 1, we will need to go on to step 2, which is manipulation of the equation to find an answer. So these are the three types of questions that you will get. Let's jump into the first one and do some practice questions and see it in detail. Before we start, these are some of the equations that you are expected to know for your exam. If you're allowed a cheat sheet, then you should write all of them on it. And if not, then you have no other choice but to learn them by heart. So we already know that whenever we have an equation find limit of some value, then we have two rules to follow. Number one, we have to simply substitute the value of x into the equation. And if and only if the answer is 0 divided by 0, then we have to manipulate. Let's try solving the first one. If I substitute 0 into the equation, I will get 0 square plus 2 multiplied by 0 plus 2, which is 0 plus 0 plus 2, and the answer is 2. The limit does exist and the value is 2. For the second question, find limit as x approaches pi of sine of x. Now this is something you are already expected to know. Let's jump back onto the formula sheet and try to see if we can figure it out from there. The table on your right, you can see the sine of theta over here and your pi over here. So the answer to that sine of pi is 0. So we'll simply say that sine of pi is 0. Now please note that the limit does exist. Limit does not exist only when 0 is in the denominator. This is a common mistake that the students make of answering 0 as the limit does not exist. Question 3. Find limit as x approaches pi of tan of x. Let's jump back to our formula sheet and try to figure it out from there. On the right side, we can see that we do not have a table for tan, but we have a table for sine and cos. And if we look at quotient identities, we can see that tan can also be written as sine over cos. Hence, tan of pi can also be written as sine of pi divided by cos of pi. Sine of pi we can see from the graph is 0 and cos of pi is -1. So 0 divided by -1. So we got 0 divided by -1, which is simply 0. Anything divided by 0 is 0. Now this is also a confusion area. People confuse -1 over 0 where limit does not exist because 0 is in the denominator with 0 over -1 where the limit does exist as 0 is in the numerator. One more thing to note is that sometimes the exam would say tan of x and sometimes it would say tan of theta. It means the same thing. Question number 4. Find limit as x approaches pi over 2 of cot of x. To solve this, we have to jump again to our formula sheet. Over here in the quotient identities, we can see that cot of theta can also be written as cos over sine of theta. So cot of pi over 2 can also be written as cos of pi over 2 divided by sine of pi divided by 2. From the table we can see that pi over 2 of cos is 0, simply 0, divided by sine of pi over 2 is 1. So 0 over 1. So we got 0 divided by 1, which is simply 0. The limit does exist and it is 0. For the last question, this is the absolute sign. It simply means that anything in the absolute becomes a positive. So if we have -10 in the absolute, it will become 10. Let's try solving the question. We know that step 1 of finding limits of such questions is simply substitution. So we will substitute -2 into the equation. So we will get -2 absolute divided by 5 minus -2. The absolute will become positive, so it will be 2 divided by 5 plus 2, which is 2 divided by 7. So this is your answer. The limit does exist and the value is 2 over 7. Now let's summarize what we have learned. To summarize, we learned that whenever we see a question, find limit as x approaches any value of any equation, we should know that this question is from calculating limits. The first step we need to do is to substitute the value of x inside the equation, and we will get either of the three scenarios. Number 1, the limit would exist if we get a numerical value. Number 2, if we get a 0 in the denominator, then the limit does not exist. And number 3, that we get a 0 divided by 0. That would mean that we need to jump onto step number 2, which is manipulation of the equation to find an answer. We also learned that when students get an answer 0 or 0 divided by something, they confuse it with something divided by 0 and they answer the limit does not exist, while the correct answer is that the limit does exist. It is simply 0. We also learned what is an absolute sign and how to solve for it. And we also realized the importance of a formula sheet. Lastly, in the beginning, I said that either you will get a single equation or two equations. We solved for all single equations, and eventually we will also see how to solve for two equations. Hello everyone. Welcome to All Possible Questions. In this video, we'll be covering calculating limits.